The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, Cruiser Max Vibrance, High Stick NT, and the Manitoba Pulse Growers.
Okay, Dennis, we are talking soybeans. Soybeans in Western Canada, but specifically, let's start with soybeans in Manitoba. Crop's been grown for over a decade now, and we've learned some important lessons. So we're here into April. Spring is looking a little ways away, even further maybe in Saskatchewan. And how does that temper maybe the interest in soybeans for part of the West?
Well, I guess what we have to really be concerned with is that if you look back in the last 2 years, we've had some very nice springs for seeding. This past year, we were in the fields relatively early, anywhere in that May 8th to May 10th range. Things were all good. Once you start getting into later part of May, there's some real concerns about growing some of the longer season varieties in the valley here and how they're going to mature. Typically, we like to see our soybeans in the ground, by May 25th. That's kind of a nice time period to have them all in by. But if you can get them a little earlier and you're not too concerned about frost, that's great. Once you start getting into later part of May and then into June, then you have to be very aware that we're getting to a crop, or growing a crop that's very long maturing, and we could run into some frost problems in fall. So if we do get into that situation, we might have some growers in Manitoba that may decide they may back off on some of their acres, and then be even more selective about the varieties they choose.
Right, and now certainly, people sort of ask about, well, soybeans are very sensitive to daylight, and so you can push it a little later because they're going to flower sooner. What's sort of the truth about sort of day length and
well, I guess the first thing you should be aware of is that soybeans typically flower at the same time every year, in that mid to later part of June. They're daylight sensitive in that respect, meaning that once you hit that critical day length, they tend to flower. What that means for the soybean crop is that if the soybean crop is planted, let's say May 10th, May 15th, in that range, the plant will continue to grow and the internodes will extend and you'll get a little taller plant. And then you hit that magic time period and the soybeans start to flower. There's been years when I've had calls from growers asking why my soybeans flowering and they're so short. Well, typically they always tend to flower at the same time. So if you're planting May 15th or you're planting towards the end of May, they typically flower at the same time. The only problem with that is if you're only relying on that to get a variety to yield and to mature, you still need the heat unit accumulation through the summertime. So this past year we had some very warm days, and also too it's dependent upon how much moisture you have through the season. If it's a fairly dry year like we had in 2012 in the Carmen area, the soybean varieties, the Czech varieties that we used last year was NSC Portage. That variety matured at 117 days. You compare that to our early season site up in Arberg, and that same Czech variety matured at 122 days.
And with, of course, the risk of frost in the fall, I mean, that we're talking about a giant yield cut, obviously, but most farmers are familiar with green seed and canola. Is there the same concern with soybeans?
Well, green seed in canola is the chlorophyll not leaving the seed properly. With soybeans, if you do get a plant that freezes and it freezes, let's say September 10th, and that crop is not fully mature, you will probably have some issues with green seed, and that can become a marketing challenge. Areas further south into the U.S. Typically grow longer seeding varieties. They have more heat units, and typically they don't see the green seed issue as what we can in Manitoba. The other thing is, if you're growing a variety that's suited for your growing region, MAPRI has been doing some tests in western Manitoba, in the Hamiota and Boissevain area, and also into Saskatchewan as well, in Saskatoon and Redbirds and some of those areas as well. But companies have been very selective on which varieties they enter into those trials, making sure that the varieties they enter in are going to be suited for that growing region. Because not only if you do put a variety in that's too long maturing, not only may you have some green seed issues, but you can really affect the yield because you don't have the heat accumulation to get the high yields. Yeah, variety selection is very key. So growers should really look at, if a variety's been grown in the area in the past, what type of yield expectation you can look at, and kind of look at, I always try to say, when we started learning about growing soybeans, we got information from Ontario, we got information from North Dakota, and we built our knowledge base, and we adapted that to our Manitoba conditions. The last couple of years, what we've seen is some very good yields in Manitoba. This past year, we had an average yield of 36 bushels an acre on just over 800,000 acres, which is phenomenal. 2011, we had almost 600,000 acres, 570,000 to be exact, and our average yield was only 27 bushels an acre because we had some dry conditions that affected the yield. Our 10-year average is about 27 bushels an acre. Our 5-year average is 30 bushels an acre. So be realistic in your yield goals when you're planting. And I always like to use the terminology when you're growing a variety or any crop for the first time, and you're trying to get accustomed to what needs to be done in this crop. Only grow as much as you can afford to lose the first year. Keep those numbers in perspective, because there are some challenges and with growing any crop, and soybeans can be, we can have some issues with frost in the fall, and remember, this is a crop that we're going to be harvesting in September, and sometimes even in October, depending on the growing season. So if you're hoping to harvest in August, you're probably going to be very disappointed, because number one, if you are harvesting in August, you probably just didn't have enough moisture, and your yield's going to be way down. So,
all right, thanks so much, Dennis.
Thank you.